Hi, my name's Tony Platt. I'm going to be teaching a class called Doing Justice to History. Sorry I can't be with you today in person, but I'm glad to be with you this way through technology. I've been teaching at several universities since 1966 and stopped teaching full-time last year. And this is going to be my first OLLI class, which I'm really looking forward to. Some of you may know of me or remember me from when I taught at the ill-fated School of Criminology in Berkeley in the early 1970s, which was a very exciting and momentous time, both for the university and for my involvement in that program. Anyway, I'm very glad to be back here and teaching this class. I'm currently doing research and writing on the relationship between history and memory, in particular how we remember, or more to the point, how we often scrupulously forget the horrors and legacies of human-made tragedies. That's the topic of the class, and that's the issue that I want to look at. How do we remember and how do we forget the tragedies that human beings have made? Now, normally when we talk about these kinds of tragedies, we think of the Holocaust, we think of Darfur. Those are the tragedies that come to mind. But I think also we can find those tragedies much closer to home. California, I think, can hold its own with many places in the world in terms of the long trail of sorrows that make up the origins and the history of this state. We begin with the extermination and genocidal policies against indigenous peoples. We have in the middle of the 19th century the systematic ethnic cleansing of Chinese immigrants out of their homes and villages and towns all over the state. We have the systematic racism that begins really with the gold rush and goes through the treatment of different populations, African Americans who come in when slavery was still in place in the South. We have also the history of systematic racism and segregation of Jewish and Latino populations in California. And then, of course, in the middle of the 20th century, we have the incarceration without due process of Japanese Americans who are basically taken from their homes and their communities and places of business and not allowed to return until the end of the war. So we have this long trail of sorrows here in California and many tragedies to look at. And what I'm interested in doing in this course is what should we do about the remembrance of those experiences? How do we now talk about those issues? How do we remember them? How do we educate ourselves and the next generation about them? And I want to examine in the class some of the psychological and the social and political reasons why we tend to practice forgetting as opposed to remembering. And we'll be looking at the reasons why individuals, on the one hand, prefer not to think about or talk about experiences that they've gone through that have been very painful, to social communities that tend to slide over these experiences and not deal with them fully, and more importantly, how political states and governments make sure that these memories are not preserved in a way that allows people to understand the history and to figure out what we can make of that experience. So in order to look at this topic and look at the whole issue of public remembrance, we're not only going to look at California and the United States, where we don't have many good examples, by the way, but we're going to look at other countries, first of all, and see how they've dealt with these issues. So, for example, we'll look at how Northern Ireland has dealt with the aftermath of the troubles that took place between Protestants and Catholics for many generations. Now that there's a peace treaty there, how are they going to deal with this issue in their textbooks, in their public memorials, in their public symbols? We're also going to look at the example of Germany that over the last 10 or 15 years has turned itself inside out to try to deal with the issue of the Holocaust and Nazism. And the country is now full of memorials and museums and public places that people can go to and places of debate and discussion about those issues. So I think Germany will actually be a very good lesson for us in terms of trying to find some models of how states and communities have dealt with the issue of public remembrance. And then we will also examine the way in which history and the arts and personal memoir come together. How do we deal with our own personal memories of a particular time that was troubling and painful? How does the arts community contribute to making artistic remembrance a public form of remembrance that people can relate to? And how does history get translated and taken out of the academic history books into the public textbooks, into the public arena, into public discussions, into museums, into memorials? How does that happen, and what can we do about it here? And I'd like you to be thinking about, as we prepare for this class, think about what it means to be effective in engaging ourselves and our communities in public remembrance. For example, have you seen the signs on the Embarcadero in San Francisco? There were some plaques there that recall what took place in San Francisco during the Great Strike of the 1930s. If you haven't looked at them, next time you're over there, you might want to go and check them out. See what you think about them. Do you think this is a good way of remembering that very troubled and conflicting time in California history? Would you do it in another way? Or many of you, no doubt, have walked through Union Square many, many times and gone past that huge monument that is in the middle of Union Square there. Some of you probably have looked up and seen it. Some of you just walked past it because we're so used to it being there. But if you don't remember what it is, you might, next time you go through Union Square, look at it, go up and read the text, look at the monument, and see whether you think that's an appropriate and fitting monument to be in a square in the center of San Francisco. You might be surprised to see what it is when you look at it closely. And then I'd like you to think about whether or not you think that's an appropriate symbol to be placed in the commercial center of San Francisco. And finally, some homework. When you leave Berkeley Rep here, you might want to cross the road and walk up to Shattuck Avenue. And if you look down in the sidewalk there at the corner of Shattuck and this street outside Berkeley Rep, you'll see a series of plaques that are actually placed in the sidewalk. And there are 4 plaques there that deal with the origins of California. They're sort of part of our origin stories, how we remember the past. But if you look at all 4, you'll find that they tell different stories about the past, and that 2 of them, at least, are in contradiction with one another. So ask yourself what you think about that as a way of remembering our history. Do you think that's effective? Would you rather see one memorial at that place? Are you glad that there are different ways of thinking about the past that are there? And do you think that's an effective way of reaching you and other people? So these are the kinds of issues that we're going to be looking at in the class, doing justice to history. And I look forward to seeing you next semester in that class. Thank you.